Hey, everyone.
Hey, Joe.
So while we're waiting for people to assemble, um, anything else that anyone wants to discuss on the agenda? We have a vote for today, so we need one more member because we have to be at 60%. And I need Paul if we're going to discuss the first one.
Hey, Richard is here.
Richard, okay, you're right. Yeah, I just saw that. And that's Paul. Okay. All right. So we have quorum. We can get started. Again, the agenda's here. Is there anything else from the agenda? Um, so the only, okay, so board meeting was Monday morning, 6 a.m. Pacific time. We went over just the most recent status. We had a couple of discussions about things. The one question that came out, or one of the questions that came out that I thought I'd bring up here is it worth trying to schedule a 2-hour or half day Zoom workshop? We can use, there's a shared whiteboard program that we can use. You can get free access as long as someone can host it, and we can host it and use it as shared whiteboard just to take notes. Zoom has breakout rooms, so we could people can have sort of direct working conversations. So this would be for the networking API. So is it worth having a more concentrated effort for the networking API to try to get some more convergence on what we're doing. I'll add that to the agenda since I opened it. And it's okay to say, nah, oh, interesting idea from the board, but we won't benefit from it at this time. Or, that's not really what we need, or we need something else. Thoughts? And I haven't talked to Mark about this yet. I'll bring it up to him today.
Yeah, I guess asking the API working group is going to be useful.
But in general, do we benefit from those sorts of? Would we benefit from that kind of concentrated work to try, if we need to move things along? Is that a useful approach for us in general? And again, I'll ask Mark if he thinks the networking is ripe for it, unless, and again, what I want is feedback on whether it's just too much overhead and won't actually, accomplish what the goal is, what's being proposed. All right, so I will take it from silence that you guys are neutral with it, on it, willing to give it a try, but nobody's like, yeah, that's great, or, oh, that's really terrible.
Sounds right.
Okay.
So Joe, how do you see it as different than what might be going on in the API working group?
So it's a lot like what's going on in the API working group, except that a longer session and adding, instead of doing it as a, weekly, presentation meeting, do it more as a, what you would do if you could do face-to-face, right? All of the big standards efforts before COVID did this to get launched, or they did it after they launched for a while and they realized they needed to get everyone together and start, driving more decisions. And so you basically put everyone in a room and you argue for a few hours, and then you basically say, here's the conclusion, here's what we're actually going to do. You create a plan with action items that you then hand out to the people, and to basically either bootstrap or help close things. So every standard effort I've been in for 20 years did something like that. And T11, that's all, in T10, that's all they did. There were multi-day in-person meetings, no online access, to basically try to drive conclusion. And they were slow and sometimes boring, but they drove conclusions, right? And people prepared for them, and so they were ready to come in and push a viewpoint. So the problem we have is doing that virtually is tough. And 1 hour, if you get going on something good, it ends in an hour and everyone has to run to their next meeting. So you don't have time to finish things nearly as much.
I see.
I mean, at least that's the idea.
So, I suggested this in the board, right? So I think this kind of, workshop succeed. So we have additional planning though, in terms of, we have to write down a set of questions that we will solve ahead of time so people can come prepared and try to close, or clearly defined goals. And if it is too free form, again, even half a day would just go off. Each of us will air what we are thinking and then kind of stops there. But if we say that, hey, networking we need to solve. It will be a layered approach, and at least have some 1 or 2 such proposals, and or defined goals helps us. At least I think it'll help us, right? So
And I've seen it both work and not work trying to do this online. And so Mark, now that you joined, the question came up in the board meeting, and again, Venkat brought it up, but I'm, I don't throw any individual board members under the bus other than myself, about hosting maybe a 2 to 4 hour, or 3. I mean, 3 may be the optimum time, because I find that if you do these at 4 hours, everyone's kind of burnt by the end of the third hour. Although at 2 hours, everyone still seems to want to talk. So, and I just did a 2 half-day version of this yesterday and the day before. So
we were burnt after 2 hours, Joe.
Oh, 2 hours. Okay. So Mark, would a couple of sessions on networking API be valuable, similar to what we just did? And it was a coincidence that we did it for the one project internally, and Venkat had done it, proposed it on Monday. Pure coincidence.
So I think it's of value. We have to limit it to a couple of hours, because you're going to lose people. And we need to focus on bottoms up use cases. Okay, because right now what we've got is contributions that are more top down. We're looking at big holistic blocks, and they're more top down. The closest one that we have that's bottoms up might be our EVPN contribution, but even then, I think we have to look at it from the bottoms up. We have to look at it from the standpoint of how do you configure and set up the interfaces, get them created, and then how do you lay VLANs on top of that? How do you extend that with VXLANs and build it from the bottom up? Because right now we're having a lot of top-down stuff. That's just my opinion.
Okay. Well, I mean, you're the chair, so maybe bring it up in your meeting at 10 a.m. and okay, see where that goes. All right. Okay, so we'll progress on that. Next topic, Paul.
Sure, I can talk about this paper. I sent it out in Slack asking for folks to contribute. Boris suggested we use what's already in the READMEs on Git and a few other places, and so I've gone ahead and done that for one of the sections, 1 or 2 of the sections, and I'm just not certain if that's what makes a good white paper, or if we should just take that content and find someone or ChatGPT or something to turn it into a paragraph style, sort of a white paper style, rather than
Don't
a bulleted list.
Yeah, so don't use it for don't use ChatGPT.
Oh yeah.
We need humans to do this.
Yep.
What's the purpose of this white paper that's different from the copy that's on the website, which maybe could be edited, improved, and the README files, which maybe could be updated with the current thinking? What does this do different than those? What's the point of it?
This would be a marketing sort of document to a first contact with someone who would be interested or wanting to know more about what we are doing here in OPI. So it would be something you could leave behind with someone after a meeting. It could be something you point someone to as they're here. You want to get a consolidated view of what we're talking about and not have to follow links on our webpage or on GitHub to get the full picture. It would be one full picture document that we would be able to provide folks.
All right. Questions, feedback for Paul? So Alad, from a use case point of view, and explaining to people sort of the why and what of OPI, if you had a white paper, as opposed to having to jump around to the various readmes and follow links and look at the GitHub structure, would this help you in the conversations you're having?
If I'm honest, Joe, to be completely honest and blunt, I don't think we need another README or another white paper or another anything. I think that anybody I speak to now knows what OPI is. The question on everybody's mind, and the answer that we do need to answer, is what have you done? What have you done that has made a difference? We're at the point where people are saying, yes, I understand what OPI is. Now prove to me that you're not just another Linux group talking their heads off. Show us real things that we can use. So we're at the point where we need to put, some real, the proof is in the pudding. Show us the pudding. Give us some pudding.
Yeah. Okay. So in terms of eating, okay, that's fair. Good
Yep.
point. In terms of the proof of the pudding is in the eating. We have a success story with the storage API. We've got 3 projects, right? We've got F5, Red Hat, and Ericsson, plus Intel, Intel, that should be coming back with, here's the status, here's what worked, and here's what didn't soon. Is that correct for all the people involved in the projects?
So again, Joe, I think my thinking about this. It has to be general. So Intel Ericsson is too specific to 2 vendors and nobody else. The F5 project is the one that I like the most because it's a real use case that people can use, and it's agnostic to both the hardware and the software layers. And I think if we had this tomorrow, I would do a white paper on that. I would say OPI has now released a package called blah, 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 and it allows you to do X, Y, Z, and here are some numbers. That will be the killer PR as far as I'm concerned.
Understood. That makes sense.
So, Tim, do we have any any hope, anything on the horizon for the F5?
Well, we've sort of restarted that. We had to reorganize the people involved, so
Well, that always happens.
that's
Yeah.
been a setback for us. So I mean, I don't know if Paul or me are willing to give you a timeline right now.
Yeah, I don't know about a timeline, but I do know that we have hardware to play with, and we have a set of people assigned to do this work now. So the work can start in earnest. We were hoping we would have it done by SmartNIC Summit and be able to show something off there, but several setbacks, reorganizations, rifts, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So if you could show it at SDC, that would be fantastic. If there was time to show it at SDC, that would be fantastic.
Yep.
Because and people at SDC would love that. And I don't know if I can say, but I think there's a good chance that the talk gets accepted.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, we have a generic demo-ish talk submitted, and it could be something like this if we are ready for it, or it could be using the storage APIs and some of the other the couple demos we've already done, showcasing those.
Yeah, Joe, I'm trying to raise hand somehow. It keeps going down for some reason, so I'm going to jump in. I don't know, something happening with the tool. Going back to the original question, I think if we need a white paper on overview, then that means we have to improve our website, because it's good to, instead of a white paper, forward them to our website, increase the traffic, and so that they kind of, becomes a habit, right, of going and seeing what's going on there, and putting everything in one single source of truth. So I think if it is generic overview, website is better. And then agree with Ilad that the white papers are better medium for use cases to showcase a vertical or a domain or a use case. So yeah, that's my opinion.
I mean, so Alad, what do you think about that? That's a good point. I mean, but okay, so yes, and sometimes some people respond better to white papers, but I do take Alad's point that if we have something we can put forward that says, hey, here's it working, doing something useful, it makes any white paper stronger. Now you can argue you need both in parallel, right? Our companies do this all the time. We put out, combinations of website, white paper, and product, and we use and then talks, right? So we've got talks nailed because we've got a lot of people who've done that for a lot of years. We've got the website, the website could probably, better reflect what we're actually doing, but it's not terrible. And then, but again, I agree, we need some project that we can showcase as kind of our primary objective. Any other thoughts? You can just speak up. Everyone's sort of in the is polite and in a groove in terms of interacting. Any other thoughts on this? Otherwise, we can. So maybe we can discuss this in the outreach meeting on Tuesday a little.
Joe, again, I think that, as you said, they go hand in hand. And I think that a white paper would be great, but I would expect as soon as we have a white paper out, if we start pushing it, people will say, okay, show me. Because POC is the next step. And I do apologize, I have to drop in like 6 minutes for another meeting. But other than that, I think we have the right direction.
All right. Okay, I don't. Yeah. All right. I think let's talk about this again in the outreach meeting, Paul.
Okay.
And see what the trade-offs are there, right? Because the points are well taken. All right. Gal, you're up. Do you want to share to walk us through?
I think feel free to step in to present the discussion. Should be good if you want. There is a nice readme there with some sequence diagram inside.
Okay. Do you want to share it? So
Yeah, I can take it. I can take the screen share.
Yeah. Go ahead and share so you can just walk through.
Yep, no problem.
And the point here,
First I'm doing it in Zoom.
that we want to vote. So pay attention.
I'll try to keep
No,
this
not
focused.
you. I'm talking to all the voting members.
Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes, sir. Drive.
Great. Okay, so this has been going around. First of all, I'll introduce myself because this is my first time here. So I am from the provisioning and lifecycle working group. I basically replaced Boris, step down. And this has been going on for like a week. So this week was my first meeting with the group. And one of the things we took is something that has actually been in discussion for a while now, which is the way to coordinate the boot between the host and the DPU. Now, what we are going to vote on is not a complete solution. It does not, on each one of those options, there would be a lot of deep dive and digging around to do. Not yet, everything is not defined here, but we wanted to at least progress in a certain path. So we described each three of those options in a very, very high level. And of course, we'll go over them right now and reach a conclusion at the end of the day, which we want to vote on. So basically, the problem that we want to solve here is how to coordinate between the host and its XPU. And the three options that were raised is the first one, which is through in-band PCI. That's basically from the UEFI. Now, the problem here with this approach is that it will require some additional work on PCIe, because currently there is no standard defined for XPU PCIe. So this will require some work in the PCIe spec. And the second, I'm not really sure if I can describe it as a problem, but a constraint is that it is done through the server UEFI, which in some cases, on some deployments, is considered untrusted, and some customers try to avoid it. While on the other hand, some people prefer it. So it is a valuable option. As you can see here, the flow is pretty simple. At the end of the day, the XPU sets its status to booting. This is something that is not yet defined, of course, we will need to define it, and set the max boot time to have, so in case it would be stuck, there would be a problem, there would be a max boot. The servers discover those entries, and then it basically loops and pulls them until the OS status is marked as booted, meaning the DPU is already booted, and we can continue on with the process. Or the max boot time is expired, and we know that the DPU is stuck or has some sort of a problem. So that was the first way, the first option to coordinate between the two. I'm not going to go over the details here.
So quick question, how does this require changes by PCIe SIG?
Okay, so I will go a bit into the details.
Is it because we are asking for new details in the config register space?
Yes, so we'll need to define subclasses in the PCIe for XPU. We will need to define this whole OS status, crash dump status, max boot time values that we are talking about here. Those things are just not defined at the moment. Actually, everything that is XPU related is not defined really. So we are doing here, as listed here, we will need to define those things within the PCIe spec.
So the most minor thing is a new enumerated type, like a class code. But we're going further. We're actually asking for a new register, like the OS status register, to be added to their structure.
For example, yes. Yeah. And there are a couple here. Anyway, we understand that this is not something immediate, and it does not solve all use cases, because as I said at the beginning, this is coming from the server UEFI, which is in a lot of times it's considered untrusted. Not every time, but some deployments. So this is the first option. The second option, which was raised, is the driver ready check. Now, I personally found this diagram a bit more confusing, so I'll just go over it without it, if that's okay with you guys. Basically, the problem that we immediately discovered is that this would occur after the PCI enumeration, which is in most cases, a lot of the time, it's a bit too late in the process. And we are not sure that it will really solve the all host to boot coordination problem, at least not all cases of it. So we prefer to avoid this option, but it was raised, so we must cover it. So the process here is basically that the UEFI driver will report when the XPU is finally booted and is already up and running. This was raised, I think, specifically in the context of PXE booting, to make sure that the disk is ready to be served to the actual host from the DPU. But this is a very narrow case.
So this was the method that Intel proposed. Dan Daly presented this to us.
Oh,
correct?
Okay. This was before my time, so I don't know.
Okay.
I just know it was here and covered, and we decided not to go in that path within the working group. And I think that was a consensus list. And the third option, which we are talking about, is through a platform BMC, basically. And here again, we have a lot of work to do to actually define things, because as you see, things are very, very, very abstract. We will need to explicitly define the in-depth process. But the basic idea is that the coordination will be done from the server BMC to the actual XPU. And that until the XPU would update its boot status, the BMC will hold the server and won't let it boot until we are reporting that the status is okay, and it will keep pulling that the status is okay. There were a couple of ways that were suggested internally. In order to do that, a couple of standards. We didn't discuss them, so I'm not going to step into them, but they are just options. And I think we understood that this option is the most feasible one, because it does not require anything to be defined in PCIe or anywhere else. We can just start digging around into it. The problem with it is that not all servers have BMC. So that's why we want to raise to a vote two options or a path forward. We want to raise to start the immediate phase with option 3, which is doing the coordination through the platform BMC, and in parallel work with PCIC in order to define the necessary parts needed to support option 1.
So you said the problem with option 3 is that the platform doesn't have a BMC. Isn't there also some cards that don't have BMCs, DPUs that don't have BMCs?
So it doesn't require the DPUs necessarily to have BMC. It
Just
can.
a way to signal back to the platform BMC.
I don't think that it necessarily requires that the XPU would have a BMC on it. The platform BMC can communicate directly with the DPU itself. But I think that that's a valid point, which we really need to step into and define, of how it would be, how the platform BMC should be connected to the DPU in order to allow this communication.
As part of this, will you also define as a separate work stream the interaction between a DPU resident BMC and a platform BMC?
A DPU other than BMC and platform BMC. Yep. So yes, as a sub of it, because we don't want to rely on the DPU having its BMC. We know it's not common on all vendors, and we are not sure that we want to make it so. We would prefer to define a path forward with or without it, and list the trade-offs in between them.
Yeah, that works. And then if a platform BMC is present, there should be something that says, here's how if a DPU resident BMC is present, what is its responsibility and interaction with the platform BMC. So putting some thought and text into that all the DPU vendors agree to, and actually all the server vendors as well, would be valuable in parallel to what you're doing here. So I like the 3-into-1 approach. I think it's the only one that's going to be, going to be successful, because we have to start somewhere. And as you said, the going and talking to the PCI SIG is going to be that's going to take a year. I mean, just realistically. So I think the only thing we can do is start with 3, but then start working 1 in the background, because it's very long calendar time. Number 2, if the BMC is present on the DPU, we should define what its interaction is, both in terms of boot, which should be nothing, and right, because again, if we're going to define this universally, the answer should be there is no interaction. But then that begs the question: what is the purpose and interaction for those DPUs that have resident BMCs? And from a global from a industry perspective, in other words, if I go form a startup next month to do some new approach to DPUs, and I'm putting a BMC on there because and I have things I know it needs to do. What I don't want is that thing to interfere with what we're doing for boot, or interfere with anything else we're defining. So we want to constrain it, but not to not have detrimental interactions, and then allow it to do whatever creative thing the company that put the BMC on that DPU wants it to do. Does that make sense? What I think we ought to do is in addition to this.
Let me try to phrase it in a sentence, and you tell me if I'm correct or not. So I'll know. You are basically saying we need to define what does a DPU with a BMC, what is the role of a BMC of a DPU in the process of host to DPU boot coordination, to make sure that the BMC does not interfere with the process that we already agreed on and defined.
That's it. That's what we need to do.
Then I agree with you.
That's exactly what we need to do. And then there's a secondary piece of that, which is that same question, but not just in relation to boot, but more generally. So, and the answer might be, hey, past that, we don't care as OPI. But we should say that. We should say, past, don't mess with the boot, and here's how here's what you need to do to not mess with the boot. Past that, we don't care. Do whatever you want. OPI is not going to touch that at all. Or for lifecycle and provisioning, we're going to say, if you're going to be OPI compliant, here are some additional constraints on you. But we don't want to go completely specify out all of the interactions, because A, I don't think we need to, and B, that would be limiting for the companies that do put DPUs on their or BMCs on their DPU. Does that make sense? So it's not directly on the boot thing, but in the discussion, it occurred to me that that's something that needs at least minimal definition, and maybe it's just a few bullets, a few requirements, 3 or 4 paragraphs, no more. It doesn't need to be more. But the boot one you have to do. Okay. All right. Other comments?
Yeah, it seems like the discussion of the BMC or not on the DPU and what it's doing is sort of beside the point here. This is about coordinating the boot between the DPU and the host. And whatever's doing the booting on the DPU, as long as it follows the prescribed coordination mechanism, that's fine, right? It could boot any way it wants, as long as it follows the coordination that we're laying out here.
So that's also true. But what we want to do is say something about BMCs on the DPU so that they don't accidentally interfere, or we need to take that into account. If it's present, and maybe it just needs to say, hey, all it has to do is follow these messages that go back and forth, and not interfere with those, and not try to do something in parallel to those. That's what I'm more worried about.
I completely agree with you. It's something that should be taken into account in our thought process. And yeah, it could be a couple of notes.
Yeah.
Make sure that the BMC does not random thing, does not do DHCP request on yada, 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 yada.
Yeah. That's it. Okay. Other comments and thoughts? And then if not, I have one more, but I'll open it for everyone else. All right. So my last one is, do we need to say anything about the behavior of non-server resident DPUs? So effectively standalone DPUs. Or are we going to say, you know, look, if you're going to put them in a switch, so you're going to make a smart switch, or you're going to put them in a little chassis, those are both considered hosting systems for purposes of this discussion. And both the hosting system and the DPUs should follow this process.
I don't know if we want to generalize it just yet. I think that after we will have a proper in-depth discussions about the internals of things, because as you see, things are very abstract at the moment. We can answer that question better.
Okay, so put that on your list of questions to answer, is in relation to a host with BMC. What is a non-hosted or a differently hosted DPU look like for relative to this process? Is there just, you define a whole nother process and we can make that in common or not, we can make a decision? Or is it, you know, it follows this process, but here's some additional requirements or constraints, and I'm fine taking that up again as a secondary topic, or as a follow-on topic, right? Because yeah, go ahead, Tim.
It occurs to me there's a middle thing here, which is when I read these bullets, they refer to the XPU in single relative to the host, which sort of ignores the use case where there might be 2 or 4 cards installed in one host, and you actually need all the cards to come up before you let the host continue with its booting. So that might just be a tweaking of the language here to include more than one card in the commentary. And then yeah, that extends to, hey, what if there's no host here to manage multi-card boot? That's the smart switch use case potentially. So getting cards to autonomously coordinate with each other, I think, is out of scope for us right now. I would propose we don't try to take that on right now. I think if you minimally have a central controller in your smart switch, that devolves into the multi-card boot. So I think we could cover that.
Fair point that we should start with a simple case, although the use case that you have mentioned is also described in the list of use cases which we want to support eventually. But I do agree that we should start with a simple case that we are more knowledgeable about, I think. And always try to keep in mind all of the use cases which we want to support, including a multi-DPU.
Well, yeah, certainly a multi-card in one host is a near and present use case today.
Yeah, and we know there are public, and we know there are public projects that have been announced that have lots of DPUs in a single chassis. You can go find reference to those. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, I'm aware of a few, but but yeah, I think we should always start thinking when we do those exercises of defining things like the entire process here. We should always think on all the use cases which we listed, and if we don't have a good enough answer for them, we can think of if we need to redefine the process or to put it on the side for a later phase, or define a new process for it in case we understand it doesn't work. But the reason that why we stated all the use cases which you want to support is to take them into account in our decisions, so essentially.
Right, and so actually, could we take again, since that's been announced publicly, could we take that as an OPI? I guess we need to have a discussion about whether that can be taken as an OPI use case. So if we follow this process that gets defined for doing the boot and the multi-boot, and making sure it all works well, we could say, hey, we're following the OPI procedure for that, and use that as another example of why OPI is useful to satisfy, make a lot happy. So we'll talk about that offline and see if we come back with a proposal that might be worth doing. And again, since it's, since the project is public, we're referring to the Israel One project that's joint between Dell and NVIDIA, and it's been publicly announced at the SmartNIC Summit, right, with all the components were on the slide. So so maybe that's something. So we'll look as to whether we ought to make, we could do an OPI POC of the boot process for that or something, or to show how the option 3 actually does the job, something like that.
I think this is something we will definitely need to take internally within NVIDIA to understand if we want to go down that path, timelines and so on.
I understand. That's what I'm saying. That's why I didn't say we would do it. Let's talk about whether we can do that, and maybe that's a later phase. And we need something, again, to Alad's point, we need projects that actually use what we're saying successfully. I mean, we do have IPDK using the storage APIs, but this is another one that could benefit. But I've gone on the sideline. Are there any other technical questions on the proposal itself to basically start with option 3 and then you run option 1, kick off option 1, but the primary thing is go define fully option 3 and then say, hey, to be OPI compliant, here's what you do and here's why it benefits you. Any other questions or comments on the immediate proposal? And I know I drug us into other things, but
That's always interesting.
Yeah.
I'll just throw out a quick thing that, to me, this whole coordination is really between the adapter vendors and the server vendors. And those of us that aren't one of those two things, it's really a don't care. We just want it to work.
Right.
Can't blame you.
Yeah, and it ought to be, so again, it ought to be transparent to you. So if your application running on the DPU has to worry about this, then we did something wrong, which is why the review is necessary. And why, but the way it's spec'd here, you wouldn't, again, if I'm going to put a firewall, or I'm going to put a load balancer, or I'm going to put a packet filter, I'm going to put a search engine or a data staging, or any of the other 50 things I could rattle off, you don't want to care about how the thing booted. You just want to be able to reload your software and potentially have the DP reboot transparently out from under the server and nothing crash, right?
Exactly. But and even with my other hat on, and that's the operating system on the adapter or on the server. Again, based on what I've been reading of these 3 options, the operating system itself shouldn't care, right?
It comes at a later phase.
It's the firmware between the server and the adapter.
Yep.
But maybe one thing that you should care is that we are working on a solution with platform BMC and without BMC. So as someone who purchases servers, if all your environment is without platform BMC, you'll know that we have something in the making which will take time. But if you want something more immediate, then you'll probably need platform BMC.
Are we really in the clear on the operating system? Because on a cold start, I agree, this is a BIOS UEFI thing, but if you reprovision your DPU and you reboot it, you know, the OS is up and running, and it's going to have to deal with that reboot.
That's something that should also be kept in mind here. I agree with you. The reboot part was left into a different discussion, which
Yep.
we haven't really started touching base on. But yeah,
That's
I
my
agree
only
with you.
caution to the comment that the OS isn't involved, because I think it does get involved eventually.
I
Not
think
in a-
that
not in
once
a
we
cold
start,
but-
as I said at the beginning, this is something very abstract. And there, if let's say, in order to talk about it in that level, I think we need to actually start doing the work into the selected method. And yeah, reboots, DPU only reboots should be taken into account in coordination between host and DPU. You are right about that.
I think we've talked enough, Joe. Should we vote?
Yeah, I was about to call time and say, all right, let's
Okay, I'll stop sharing, folks, if that's okay with you
yeah,
guys.
let's vote. So let's vote. All right, so Del, so we'll do a roll call vote. So Del votes yes. So Stephen, Red Hat.
Yes.
Okay, Richard, Tencent,
Yes.
FinCat, Keysight,
Yes.
Orin, NVIDIA,
Yeah.
and Tim, F5.
Yes.
All right, so it passes. We have Dan Daly from Intel, Pursoon from Marvell, Song Ming from ZTE, and Dong Wei absent. Is that correct? Did I miss anyone? All right, so
Oscar Perez from NVIDIA.
right. But Orin is your voting member.
I see. Okay.
Standing in
Understood.
for Tahi.
Understood.
Okay. All right, so it passes 6-0 with 4 absent. Excellent. All right, so you guys, Gal, you guys can proceed. And then there was a question that came up. So Sridhar, can you provide are there any lab hiccups still remaining, or did that all get cleared up?
Oh, so Monday, I think, yeah, on Tuesday, they came back and they kind of, again, they said, we sorry, we gave you a wrong information. We don't accept any modifications to our MSA kind of a thing. So you will have to sign the original agreement, but we can add some notes in the service order. What are the things that we can delete from the agreement kind of a thing. So they don't want to actually delete in the agreement. They can mention it in the service order that this section is deleted. So I had a meeting with our legal team today. Luckily, their suggestion is to treat these both as a single document and let LF sign both together kind of a thing. So we found a solution, luckily. So to answer to the Paul's question, what is the timeline to finish? I hope by Tuesday or Wednesday it should be done.
All right. Any questions for Sridhar?
So we will treat the agreement and the service order as a single document and sign both of them together and keep it together all the time.
And then maybe next week we could get a general update now on the direction, and Mark as well. So for the API and lifecycle groups, we can get a general update on status and direction.
I'm actually not here next week.
Okay.
I'll have someone cover for me. So in 2 weeks, that's okay.
Yeah, let's do it in 2 weeks. And then Mark, maybe we can do networking next week.
Hey, Venkat, quick question for you on the lab oversight team. Should we delay meeting until after this is signed?
Yeah, that makes sense because I mean, I can give a quick update. Let's see if, okay, Mitcha is not here. So because we are ready to go, right? We have what needs to be bought. All the quotes are taken. They all expired. So we have to go back and there may be small
Yep.
variation in the prices, but usually it's not much. And I think, when we approved the budget, we put in a little bit of slack there, I think.
Yes, we did.
So, there's no point in meeting right now. I think let the signature happen and immediately Mircha needs to do the work of just updating the quotes and ordering all of them. And then we could, once that happens, then it's important for us to meet and start talking about, how the lab would look like, because we don't have the whole thing up in the very on day one. So what we have and how it can be used, I think it's good to get the legal done, get this ordered, get some dates of when things might fall in place, and then start talking. We could always meet, but it's just we may be wasting time. Yeah.
All right. That's it. We'll talk to you guys next week.
Thank you much, Joe. Bye.
Thank you.